And what's your name? Dragons have names, don't they?
To you, I'm just a dragon. Now sit. I'll take you to my cave and other mountains. I hope they won't find you there. I'm already tired of messing with you.
Yeah, it's going to be another one of those videos. Hope you're ready. Hey everyone, I just played the Dragon's Princess Elmarion, and it made me realise something. There aren't that many dragon video games out there, which is not to say dragons aren't present in the medium. Oh no, there are games with dragons, games about dragons, games with a dragon in the title, games where you fight them, games where you raise them, and as I've discovered perusing the dragon tag on Steam, a surprising number of games where you can woo them too. But very few actually give you the chance to play as a dragon. Well, aside from Spyro and How to Train Your Dragon, I guess. But I'm not talking about the family-friendly stuff. I mean games aimed specifically at adults. Off the top of my head, I can think of three. Reign of Fire for the PS2, released as a tie-in to the movie of the same name in 2002, Lair for the PS3, an overhyped and quickly forgotten exclusive from 2007 that seemed to be absolutely everywhere until it wasn't, and Divinity Dragon Commander from 2013, all of which made being a dragon only one part of the overall experience. Reign of Fire locked its dragon campaign behind a whole other vehicle-based human one. Divinity Dragon Commander gave equal weight to the political RTS side of the situation, and the less said about Lair the better, but I think that makes sense. Whether they're treated realistically or as magical monsters, whether they travel on 4 legs or 2, whether they're mindless beasts or sentient creatures, dragons are one of the ultimate expressions of a power fantasy. They're big, they usually breathe fire, most of them can fly even when they don't have wings, and whether playing a rider commanding from the saddle or as the beast itself, it's hard to create a conflict that doesn't start and end with, and then the dragon swooped in and burned its enemies before returning home. How do you build tension when you're already at the very top of the power curve? How do you escalate conflict when the only thing that can realistically threaten you is another larger dragon? The same things that make them such great villains, such engaging boss fights, such compelling creatures, also make them terrible video game protagonist material. And yet, I've always found the idea of a pure dragon simulator interesting. What would that look like? How would that play? Could you make it work without adding in extra elements like a separate human campaign, or an RTS system, or 6-axis flight controls? Could it actually be good? Only one game has ever provided an answer, and it is, surprisingly, yes. Elmarion Dragon's Princess, or the Dragon's Princess Elmarion, not to be confused with Elmarion Dragon Time, released by the same team earlier the same year, is a dragon simulator from the nightmarish depths of 2020 by Russian indie developer Fleon Games, and it is one of the most beautiful examples of eurojank I've ever played. It's a game I've been wanting to cover for years, because it does actually make it about 50% of the way to realizing that pure dragon simulator I've been dreaming of ever since I first rented Reign of Fire for the PS2 way back in the mid-2000s. But the other half it doesn't cover is a dense and treacherous swamp of jank, glitches, and bad ideas that is an absolute slog to wade through. I have started playing this game for a video only to drop it after 30 minutes more times than I can count, and going off the achievement stats on Steam, that seems to be the standard Elmarion Dragon's Princess experience. People play the first level, realize, oh, this isn't what I wanted at all, and peace out. But if you push through the game's opening and actually crest that hill, you'll discover it gets so much worse. I knew I wanted to make a video on the Dragon's Princess from the first couple of levels alone, but once I actually lifted the rock to see what was wriggling underneath, I was awestruck. Elmarion the Dragon's Princess is not the game it appears to be on the surface at all. It's like my profile picture. You look at it and you think, yeah, that's a weird drawing, but then you see the rest of it and oh my god, there's so much, why is it like that? There are moments in this game that left left me speechless, that left me furious, that left me baffled. And between them all, it convinced me that yes, a pure dragon simulator is indeed possible. So let's talk about it. But before I get my hands into the guts of this game, this video is going to spoil just about everything regarding the Dragon's Princess. So this is your one and only warning. Also, this video and everything I make on the channel is now made possible by the generous people supporting me on Patreon. I don't make money off ads and don't take sponsorships, so if you like what I do and want to see more, please consider donating. And if you don't want to give Patreon money or can't support monthly, Ko-Fi is also an option. Links are in the description. And if financial support isn't possible but you still want to help the channel out, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share the video around because YouTube sure won't. Anyway, let's get to it. This is Elmarion, the Dragon's Princess. The jank begins before you even hit gameplay. The main menu is a bit static, but the key art is nice, and the plinky plonky piano music sets the mood well, at least until the synthetic strings come in and the track starts to loop. And just wait until you see the options menu. Oh no! The game does rein the jank in a little once you actually hit start. You're given 4 different types of dragon to play as, each with their own strengths and weaknesses and special abilities, put a pin in that, and a charming little level select map that allows you to replay any of Elmarion's 10 missions. It's all a little bit scuffed, but it's still got promise. That changes the second you make your selection. I didn't edit that at all. There's no opening cinematic, no sort of text crawl to set up the world. You're just here, in the sky, staring in the wrong direction. And before the tutorial text boxes can even finish fading in and out, the game grinds to a halt to deliver some dialogue.
Oh, what a beautiful forest. Oh, someone is screaming below. Calling for a dragon. I wonder who she is calling. Me? People are afraid of me. Who might need me? Let's have a look. It looks like this girl is asking for my help. So what? I don't have to help anyone at all. Though, I don't like these people. They look like bandits. I'll teach them a lesson.
Save me!
And this is all the instruction you get for level 1. Once you reach the nearby town, you find the princess menaced by a few thugs, but they're no match for a dragon. A single fireball to the face is enough to take them out, and once you kill, like, 6 of them, that's it. Level's over. The dragon doesn't even really save the princess, he just kills everyone and fucks off.
Thank you, dragon. I knew that you would save me from these villains.
Actually, I'm not used to getting involved in people's affairs. I don't even know why I helped you. Now, I have to go.
Dragon, please take me with you. Otherwise they will find and kill me.
Tut tut. I've had enough of this. Hide somewhere, and you won't be killed.
It's only at the start of the second level that he decides to take an interest in her well-being.
It seems like this girl decided to hide in a house in the mountains. Not the best place. I'd better see if they're looking for her. Oh, maybe I'll just get away from here. What do I need this girl for?
Oh god, I'm playing as tsundere himbo Smaug.
Well, friend.
Ah, my frickin' ears! Okay, before we move on, why is the dialogue so low in the mix? I can barely hear the dragon over the music, and this despite the fact the guy's microphone is peaking.
What do I need this girl for?
The princess is only slightly better, but still drowned out by the backing track.
Dragon, please.
And the dragon's inner voice sounds like he's right up against the microphone. He's so much louder than everything else in the game, and he appears so infrequently that he's almost like a jump scare.
Now you are responsible for this girl.
Needless to say, the moment this bit of dialogue ended, I immediately went and turned the music down just so I could hear what the hell the characters were saying. It's almost like the game is trying to hide how bonkers the story is by burying it beneath the music, but I'm pretty certain this was all just a mistake. I'll save the rest of my thoughts on the sound design for later though, because after the broken rollercoaster of stop-start gameplay across the opening level, you're finally free to take to the skies and be a dragon. Level 2, House, seems to be about as far as most players get into Elmarion the Dragon's Princess, at least if you once again go off Steam achievements. And it's not really a surprise as to why. The first level, Girl, goes by so quickly that you're not really given a chance to actually try out the mechanics. You're allowed to fly around for maybe a second before getting dragged down close to the dirt to take out the bandits before they reach the princess. You could always ignore her cries for help, I guess, but the map is so completely empty beyond the little town right next to the spawn point that there's really no reason to explore. It's clearly meant as a tutorial, even if it's a little too impatient to function well as one. The second level serves as a much better introduction to the game, because most of the time, Elmarion the Dragon's Princess wants you to wait, and the teeny tiny countdown timer at the top of the screen is your first hint of just how much of your life it wants to waste. Because, you see, Elmarion isn't actually a dragon simulator. It's a game-long wave defense escort mission. Here you only have to protect the princess for 10 minutes, which, you know, isn't too bad, but Mission 3, Cave, bumps it up to 15. And oh god, if this is how the game starts, imagine what it's gonna be like at level 10, at the top of the difficulty curve. And every level is just the same forests and fields and grey rocky hills. This isn't what I wanted at all. Did you hear that? That's the sound of 75% of all players closing the game forever. But if you decide to stick around, you'll discover there's actually quite a bit to do in level 2. The princess's hut sits nestled between some mountains, which gives the neighbouring villages two main routes of attack. The towns will periodically spawn in more enemies, so you have to watch the mountains for waves of new thugs and archers, but they're not so constant that you can't explore. Not yet, anyway. There still isn't that much to see or do beyond the towns, but the freedom to fly around to your heart's content is nice. Despite how janky the combat is, the flying is actually really smooth and responsive. In fact, I'd even call it fun. It feels great to soar over the world, to watch the fields and forests and towns zoom past beneath your wings. It's just not something you'll get to do very much in these opening levels with your attention chained to the princess on the ground. Things can and will spiral out of control if you neglect her too much. Once the enemies get too close, the game will give you like 10 seconds to clear them out, or it's an instant game over. And most levels inevitably place her in the most awkward bit of terrain on the entire map, which not only makes melee combat next to impossible, since you won't be able to get close enough to the ground to claw and bite the offending bandits, but also rules out ranged attacks like fireballs, since they'll just shoot off into the sky if you try to pull them off too close to the princess, if they even trigger at all. The safest option is to keep the valley clear of enemies, and catch them on their attempts to enter the pass. But, as I said, they're still infrequent enough that you won't be glued to the valley 100% of the time. You can fly out to attack the towns head on, and you'll want to, because bringing down buildings is by far the easiest way to level up in this game. Each individual enemy is only worth a handful of XP, but property damage nets you far greater rewards, to the point that you can hit each mission's level cap in no time flat. Doing so won't stop the enemy spawning in, which I think is a bit shit, but it is fun, even if they don't crumble upon destruction. They just sort of despawn after a few moments. And on top of the XP, some buildings will offer you wearables too, tone-appropriate dragon attire like bunny ears. Oh god, I'm playing as tsundere himbo bunny girl Smaug. The wearables are randomized too, so each building is like a Kinder Surprise. It comes with a fun toy, and is illegal in America. Raids will open you up to danger though. Towns always have a lot of people hanging around, even when most of them aren't running across the map to kill the princess, and they will not hesitate to shoot you out of the sky. Not that they really can. Much like the buildings, whenever the dragon dies, he sort of stops, and then you get jump scared by the Bone Brigade. The health bar in the top left is more of a guideline than an actual number. There were certain points in the game where I went for minutes with it completely empty. A much surer way to tell if you're still alive is if the dragon responds to your inputs. If he doesn't, you're boned. But it's worth the risk to bring down an architectural chonker. I'm talking fat stone castles, complete with turrets and bastions. Oh, yes! This castle is the centerpiece of level 3. As I've said before, Cave is just another wave defense mission with a slightly heftier time limit. Only instead of a shack nestled between two mountains, the dragon has offered the princess refuge at his own cave.
Oh, dragon. You didn't fly away.
Better shut up, woman.
Elmar, you can't say that. But it's not like he cares about her or anything.
Sit in the cave and don't stick your head out. Oh, I'm such a fool. Why have I got myself involved in this?
Why can't you stay with me? What if they come again? Oh, what's wrong with you, dragon?
Nothing. Everything is fine.
I mean, why would you even suggest something so incredibly silly? From this point on, Princess Alina can heal the dragon for free, which I think is a great way to incentivize returning to her every so often, beyond the need to check that she isn't about to be kidnapped. Despite appearances, the dragon is a delicate little baby. Most enemies can drain your health in 3 or 4 strikes if you ever stop moving long enough for them to hit you, so the princess's healing abilities offer an extra way to avoid the bone zone, especially in the early game. I certainly sent the grumpy fucker back to the cave for aid many times over the course of level 3, because this is the first of Elmarion's 3 major difficulty spikes, and it's a lot, mainly because the cave is located like 500 meters away from an enemy castle. The dragon acts like he can't believe the king's army has found them at the end of the level, but my brother in Draconis, you can see the castle from your fucking cave.
They've found us, even here.
Which I guess makes sense. If I were a king in a fantasy world, I'd want to keep tabs on the dragon living within my borders too. And the castle's garrison takes no time at all to cross the distance, so you've got to be on top of things right from go. Bringing down the castle and the surrounding town might not stop more enemies from popping in, but the raids will draw their attention and prevent them from shooting straight across the map to grab the princess. Though even if you do manage to avoid getting riddled with arrows and sent to the bone zone, you'll still need to keep an eye on the mountains anyway, because raiders and giants will occasionally wander in to make a play for Alina as well. I don't actually know what the map is like beyond these peaks, if you can come across an outpost of raiders or a town of giants, because the huge fuck-off castle right next to the dragon's super secret lair kept vomiting out enemies so quickly I didn't have time to explore. Even once I'd sent the castle to the fucking cornfields, they just just kept coming. But whether you're able to keep the flow of enemies under control, or crash and burn before a flood of soldiers, after a while, the whole thing becomes a bit of a chore. The flying is fun, but you can't go anywhere. The combat can be engaging, but it can also be extremely repetitive, and you really feel that hard time requirement once you hit the 10-minute mark. The balancing act of having to keep several enemy spawn points under control was fine for one level, but for 2 in a row, it is exquisitely tedious. So again, I don't blame anyone for dropping the game at this point. I don't blame anyone for assuming this is all Elmarion has to offer either, because it's what I assumed too. This is as far as I ever got in my original playthrough way back in 2021, and I never made it to level 3 again in any subsequent attempt, until I sat down determined to finally make this video. Not even the promise of an actual plot can break the tedium, because we all know once we hit level 4, it's still just going to be the same old shit on a different map with an even larger time requirement.
Damn it! What do they want from you? They've found us, even here!
I am so sorry, Dragon. They're all hunting for me.
Is that a fucking sad face in the subtitles?
Why?
Anyway, it's here that Alina actually reveals to the dragon that she is, in fact, a princess. Something I, and presumably every other player, already assumed given the title of the game, but that's not important. The king's out to kill all the dragons for some reason, but our boy's not concerned.
Ho ha ha ha! So scary! People are weak! You cannot compete with dragons! Ha!
Except the king can compete with dragons because he's discovered the location of their one weakness, so he's very concerned actually.
Oh, Crystallis.
Crystallis? What? It can't be. How did he learn about it?
He has very strong magicians at court. They must have found it somewhere.
Do you have that scroll that you fetched with you?
Yes.
Let me see it. It's a map. And there are some marks on it.
Maybe these marks indicated important places on the map.
Well, it's almost like a selection of mission markers to choose from. The dragon also finally introduces himself, and in the most tsundere way possible too.
Let's fly to the nearest mark. And yes, my name is Elmar, by the way.
Oh, have you finally decided to get acquainted, I am very happy about that.
I like how Alina introduces herself again as well in the subtitles, but the scene cuts away to a loading screen before she can do so, which really speaks to just how janky this game is overall in terms of presentation. Subtitles not matching spoken dialogue or syncing up at all is nothing new in video games, but I've never seen a title come off as so impatient with the delivery of its own story. The staccato rhythm of the cutscenes is already bad enough. Every time the game pauses to deliver some dialogue, it's like getting smacked, but the way it rushes through the plot is a sight to behold. The incredible thing is, no other part of Elmarion is like this. In general gameplay, the Dragon's Princess is smooth as butter, bar 1 or 2 trademark Unity engine stutters. You can zoom from one side of a level to the other without hitting any sort of frame rate turbulence, and like I said, that's great. That's exactly what I'm after in a dragon simulator. But unfortunately, the trade-off is most maps are pretty basic. Each level might have unique terrain, enough to make them obviously different when looked at side by side, and a couple do have a lot of personality, but that doesn't make them particularly detailed. The mountain slopes are smooth and the forests are sparse, which is fine when viewed from high above at the top of the world, but getting close, and and it almost drops right into the uncanny valley. Stop to hover for a second and you'll notice how empty so many levels are. Fly low to the ground and you'll realise how lo-fi and repetitive the trees and buildings are. Soar far enough and you'll slam right into an invisible wall. For how big the maps seem, they're never as vast as you think. That the Dragon's Princess is able to pull off the illusion of scope at all is impressive for such an unpolished title, but it is an illusion, and it only wears thinner the longer you play. I think that's why you're always kept chained to the princess, or a time limit. That way you're always moving. That way the world maintains the appearance of scale. The best way I can describe it is flyover country, but maybe a more medium appropriate comparison would be a dead MMORPG. I've never been a big MMORPG enjoyer. I've never been a small MMORPG enjoyer. As a genre, it's just not for me. But the little I have experienced comes from the mid-2000s, and to my eyes, Elmarion the Dragon's Princess has the exact same look and vibe as 2005 era World of Warcraft, from the couple of hours I played with my friends anyway. In a very genuine way too. Not as though Fleon was aiming for a retro style, but as if the game was built in the mid-2000s, fell through a wormhole, and got spat out 15 years later in 2020. The mountains might be huge, but they have a smoothness to them that you just don't see in video games anymore. The forests feel dense from the ground, but when seen from the sky, they come off as patchy. Settlements pop up on sections of artificially flattened terrain, rather than conforming to a more chaotic, naturalistic landscape. If you took to this world on foot as one of the weird little guys sent out to slay a dragon on his first day, it would feel enormous. Every map would take 30 minutes to walk from end to end at minimum, and if it were an MMORPG, the presence of other players and NPC mobs and other stuff to do would make up for the detail missing from the textures, but experienced on your lonesome from cloud height, it just feels kind of dead. The fact you do experience the world from such lofty heights kind of necessitates that lack of detail and density too. If Elmarion's world was as lush and vibrant as many fantasy worlds are described, the sheer number of trees necessary to pull it off convincingly would almost certainly cause the game to chug down to single-digit frame rates as entire sections of forest were loaded in and out beneath your wings, or else the game would suffer from terrible pop-in. Not to mention, it would make combat next to impossible, as trees already give the enemies an advantage against you in their current patchwork configuration. So if the trade-off for a less detailed world is more dynamic and satisfying aerial movement and easier combat, I'm not going to say that's a bad thing, but it does make the world feel empty when you've got nothing to do. A day-night cycle does breathe a bit of life into things, but it doesn't actually impact gameplay in any way. It's just very pretty. In fact, the lighting overall is pretty good, but I suspect that's more thanks to the Unity engine than to Fleon. The repurposed MMO allegations don't stop with the terrain though. The heads-up display has a very mid-2000s RPG look that, again, comes off as genuine rather than stylistically retro, and that certainly has a charm to it, but it's not something that can keep the game visually interesting across the 4 or 5 hours it'll take to complete, especially not the early game with how one-note it is. The only thing that really sets each of the first 3 levels apart are the enemies and settlements, and they're also what really kept me going early on. The second I saw the castle 10 feet away from the dragon's cave in level 3, it became my life's ambition to tear that fucking thing down, and I was always interested to see what other big building the game would throw at me next. I was equally as curious about the other fantastical creatures populating the world. Level 3's giants proved it's not just humans and dragons running around, and later missions made good on that potential. The game introduced way more fantastical elements than I was expecting, stuff I'm actually going to save until we get up to them, because I want them to be just as much as a surprise to you as they were for me. The characters aren't super detailed or anything. Most of them are so small to begin with, you have to squint to even make out what they represent. represent, but that doesn't matter when you're facing down an army of them. What the game lacks in detail and density, it more than makes up for in personality. It just hides most of it behind an early game slog of samey fantasy forests and mountain valleys. Like it wants you to prove you're worthy of the good shit by getting through the slop. But again, there's just something about it that I can't help but find charming. Of course, at the end of the day, a dragon simulator is only as good as its dragons, and thankfully, Elmarion nails the design. 3 out of the 4 class options for Elmar are very classic dragon designs, and they are all dragons. They have 4 legs and 2 wings, rather than the more naturalistic 2-wing, 2-leg wyvern look currently in style, and both variations are equally valid. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I chose the fire dragon for this recorded playthrough because it's a classic. You've got the red scales, the flame breath, nicely proportioned wings. It's just perfect. The ice dragon and the electric dragon are both tied for second place in terms of looks, but the green dragon sucks. I hate him. The horns are nice, but the stubby tail and tiny wings are just awful. The proportions are vile, and he's not even that big, so the fact he's the only other dragon worth playing through the game again solely for the mechanical variety on offer just makes his design even worse. But again, let's put a pin in that, because I need to talk about how I'm a dragon snob. I am very particular about talking dragons in fiction. I can't tell you why. I don't have an answer. It's not something about myself I particularly feel the need to confront, given dragons don't actually exist. But generally, I really don't like it when they talk, even in the most fantastical of fantasy stories. There are only 2 exceptions. They either have to be really fucking big, like Smaug, or really fucking small, like Toothless from the How to Train Your Dragon books. But if they start to talk at any point between those sizes, I'm out. Most of the dragon types in Elmarion fit comfortably in the big enough category, but Green Boy just doesn't cut it for me. He's just a bit too small. And I understand that doesn't make any sense, but here we are. It's my video. What are you gonna do? I hear this thing speak, and it makes me irrationally angry. Not that the voice actually changes between dragons. Whichever one you pick, you're playing as a tsundere himbo.
Now, I have to go.
I think I've played enough of Elmarion's dialogue at this point to make it clear how much I love this performance. It perfectly encapsulates Elmar's character, and it even manages to sound like a dragon without any sort of post-production tinkering.
Oh, what's wrong with you, dragon?
Nothing. Everything is fine.
It may not be technically proficient, but it works, and it fits, and every word out of this thing's mouth had me doubled over with laughter. Elmar and Alina get the lion's share of the dialogue, but there are a couple of other characters with speaking roles sprinkled throughout the game, and they're all just as bizarre. The others might have better recording equipment, but the dialogue they're asked to recite is no less baffling, especially given how miscast they all are, which, once again, I'm going to keep a secret for now until we get up to them, because a couple are a real shock. The only one I can really talk about at this point is Elmar's inner voice, since he's already popped up. This guy puts in a good performance in spite of the material, but he's still always a surprise in a literal sense, because he's mixed so loud compared to everyone else.
Maybe I'll just get away from here. What do I need this girl for?
Well, friend, now you are responsible for this girl.
I don't know why he sounds like that, but he does, and it's terrifying every single time he returns, because his appearances are so rare, it's easy to forget he's around until he's screaming in your ear. Alina probably fares the best out of the voice cast. She's not too over the top or constantly peaking like Elmar, and she's not borderline ASMR like the inner voice. And she doesn't sound miscast like everyone else I can't talk about yet. She gives a perfectly fine performance.
You're bleeding. Let me see.
It's nothing. It's just a scratch.
Wait. Don't get angry. I want to help. I can heal wounds.
Don't touch me.
You're so big and strong, and yet you're afraid of treatment, just like a small child.
I am not afraid. I don't trust people.
Just close your eyes for 2 seconds. That's it. Attaboy. Done. You'll get better soon.
I was already fine.
It's through the actress that Alina really comes alive, because all the in-game character model does is stand around waiting to be kidnapped. I don't think she moves once throughout the entire game. I don't think she can. You may as well be defending a cardboard cutout, so it's a testament to the actress's performance that she's able to give Alina such a big heart. All the model can tell you about her character is that she's got a big bust. Fleon weren't able to add much detail to the textures or the models in the Dragon's Princess, but they still know what gamers want. And honestly, it's not worth getting upset about. It's just an odd, amusing choice, especially when you'll almost never actually see it. There are also some definitely topless, potentially naked feminine enemies that pop up later in the game that suffer the same problem too. They're so small that even if you grab a magnifying glass and squint, it's hard to tell what you're even looking at. I wouldn't even call it schlocky, even if it does fit into that tradition of fantasy cheesecake. It's just strange. Anyway, the rest of the sound design is about what you'd expect from an example of indie eurojank. At best, it's serviceable. At worst, it's repetitive and annoying. The flap of Elmar's wings never got old. Nor did the swish of arrows arcing through the air to shoot him out of the sky. But I could go the rest of my life without hearing the growls and snarls of the dragon's attacks, and it'd still be too soon. By the end of the game, I never wanted to hear them again. The only repetitive sound effect that never outstayed its welcome was the standard enemy death moan. I could listen to that shit for hours. I don't think I could listen to the music. I suspect I may have saved myself a lot of grief by turning the music down right at the start of the game, so I could have a chance of even hearing the dialogue, because the Dragon's Princess has 2 whole entire tracks, and one of them only plays over the main menu. The other plays during gameplay, and it's not bad, but it's not great either. Most of the time, it just faded into the background, and again, I imagine that's only because I turned the volume down. If I had to listen to this at full blast, uninterrupted for 5 hours, I think I'd fucking lose it. Even dialed down as low as it could go without turning it off entirely, the music really made me feel just how long the game's countdown timer mechanics were. Having to focus on it during moments of downtime while waiting for 5, 10, 15 real-world minutes to count down only added to the tedium at the core of Elmarion's level design. So while editing this video, I discovered the game has a third music track that almost never plays and is thoroughly generic. Take a listen.
What a beautiful forest!
But ultimately, if I had to sum up the game's presentation in a word, it'd be inconsistent. None of the pieces fit. It's like all the enemy factions and building types and level layouts were made for completely different projects and then kit-bashed together. Parts of the Dragon's Princess feel like they were built for a real-time strategy game, others an RPG, some bits feel like they were intended for something a little more down-to-earth or open world, some bits feel feel like they were thrown together for an MMO that never got made. Maybe it's simply the victim of poor direction, but I don't know. There are just elements of the Dragon Princess's presentation that feel like remnants of something that never saw the light of day, like the Bone Zone. This death screen just doesn't fit Elmarion. These skeletons don't appear anywhere else in the game. You certainly never fight them, or the game's aforementioned horniness. What's the point of even including a little bit of Monster Girl skin when the player won't even be able to see it most of the time? When you finally do get to see where the giants come from, their settlements don't match the surrounding terrain in art style or size. It's bizarre. In a very charming way, but still bizarre. And I know it's weird to try and talk through a game's presentation whilst also trying to keep as much of it hidden as possible, but trust me, the wait is worth it. You are not prepared for the places the Dragon's Princess is about to take us. I certainly wasn't. I thought I'd had this game figured out for years, ever since I first played it in 2021. I went into level 4 expecting more of the same: defend the princess for 20 minutes, bring down a castle or two, level up a bunch, get the next nugget of story, and then move on to level 5 and do it all over again. But I was wrong. The first 3 levels give such a strong impression of what the whole game will be like that it's a genuine shock to learn that it's false. Level 4 tosses out the time requirement. It tosses out the need to protect Alina since she's riding on Elmar's back, and it even tosses out the wide open map full of generic fantasy forests and castles for a dense maze of truly trippy snow-capped mountains. It's such a violent deviation from what came before, and yet by the end of it you'll be wishing for the good old days of the early game's escort missions, because this is hell. I wasn't lying when I said you wouldn't be fighting off armies of skeletons like you see in the game over screen, but that doesn't mean the undead don't come out to play. Welcome to the fucking Bone Zone. The insidious thing is, the game takes its time luring you into its trap before going in for the kill. Level 4 starts you off just flying through some mountains, and the terrain is so unlike everything that's come before that it's just nice to fly around, especially since you're no longer chained to a single point on the map. There's something captivating about these mountains to me. As a dragon, you're already huge, but the cliff faces make you feel tiny. They've got a realistic scale combined with a very unrealistic layout and look that makes them feel genuinely fantastical, like the whole range is a scar left behind by some grand magical battle from thousands of years ago. It might just be mountain passes and valleys, but it's different enough that I want to explore it. I want to see what it has to offer, and for a few seconds, the game actually lets you do that. And oh look, a green blip streaking across the screen. Let me just turn around to investigate, and oh, there's more of them. A lot more. You know what, I think I'm just going to leave. I'm just going to fly away. I mean, how many of them could there be? Fuck.
There are many undead flying around here. They remain here since the last invasion. Let's burn them.
But, Elmar, we're in a hurry. It would be better to fly around them somehow.
I wonder how. They are everywhere here.
You fucking said it, Elmar. Level 4 marks the second of the game's 3 big difficulty spikes, and it is by far the most tedious. The mission may not hit you with a time limit, but rather than offer you the freedom to linger and explore, all it does is deny you the guarantee of escape. I wish all you had to do was survive 20 minutes dodging angry ghosts, but you have to make it from one side of the map to the other, and it is maddening. My playthrough of the Dragon's Princess only took 5 hours, but level 4 took up a full 60 minutes of that total, because even without the time requirement, the game demands that you wait. There's no way to fly through the swarm. There are simply too many. There's got to be hundreds of the little bastards hanging around the mountains, but you'll be dead long before you manage to aggro them all. Once a certain number of ghosts join the party, their mere presence is enough to start carving out huge chunks of Elmar's health, and he can be dead in seconds if you're not careful. You don't even have to stop and let them catch up to feel their wrath. After a while, they just suck the life right out of him and send you to the bone zone anyway. And yet, I kept trying to brute force my way through the hordes of undead, because the alternative was somehow even worse. Killing the ghosts is the only surefire way to make it through Mission 4, and they all go down in 1 or 2 hits if you've been leveling up your abilities regularly, so it sounds like cutting through them should be an afterthought, until you realise that your basic fireball can only damage one enemy at a time, until you realise Elmar's other abilities, which can damage multiple enemies at once, can't hurt the ghosts, or at least they wouldn't for me, until you realise the powers the game has railroaded you into leveling up by throwing the same mission at you 3 times in a fucking row are basically worthless in your new situation. And that's just when it comes to the fire dragon. I have no idea how you're meant to get through this as Green Boy, whose whole deal is built around summons and self-defense. I can't help but wonder if I just arrived at the Raveyard with the wrong build, but given how scuffed most abilities are anyway, I don't think I did. I think the game is just like this, which meant my only option was to fly as close to a pack of ghosts as I dared and take them out one by one, shot by shot, and it took ages. Not just because every single one took a couple of shots each, but because sometimes the fireballs would just despawn halfway across the valley, so some took upwards of 5 or 6 shots to actually bring down, and every time I'd inch a little further into the level, 20 more of the fucking things would pop into existence up ahead. After a while, I started drawing small groups over to kite them around in circles while I took pot shots at them, just for a bit of stimulation, and eventually that became my only option anyway, because after a certain point, purple ghosts with ranged attacks started to appear, and the only way to stop them chipping away at Elmar's health was to stay in motion. What's worse is the map is full of dead ends and side passages that lead nowhere, but are still fucking full of ghosts. The developers might have intended them to be fun side content with extra stat upgrades and tough enemies to score nice loot from, but in reality they're just a trap to lure you into wasting more time. At one point I came across this giant red lich, and I thought, hey, this has got to be the boss at the end of the level, but it was just a dead end. I hadn't even met the purple ranged ghosts by that point. I still had half the level, and 30 minutes to get through before I'd finally reach the other side of the mountains. I'd get to another valley full of ghosts and think, fuck this, I've got to be getting close to the end by now, and try to zoom past them, but they'd always catch up, and there would always be more to meet me further down the mountain range. It was just endless. Thank fuck the mountains are littered with mana replenishing standing stones, otherwise it probably would have taken even longer. Thank fuck there's a manual save system too. The earlier levels were all so short I never really needed to use it, but that all changed here. There's no honour in jank. Save early, save often, see how much the dead care when you're on your 20th attempt, 6 hours deep into Mission 4. It got to the point I was saving just about every valley, because I did not want to kill a single ghost again if I did not have to. I don't even want to think about how long Mission 4 would have taken if I didn't have that to fall back on, and when I finally reached the end of the level, it was still with a line of ghosts chasing after me. Come on, come on, come on, end! End!
Oh no, these are flying rags in comparison to me, the great dragon.
Yes, you are very strong, Elmar. I'm not afraid of anything when I'm with you.
Why do you think, Elina? that this place was marked on your scroll?
I think they're looking for something here. Could you fly around and take a look? See if you find anything unusual.
Will you fly with me?
No, I better stay in the cave and make a fire. It's terribly cold in here. Ugh.
Okay, I can easily make a fire for you.
Thank you.
Once again, I just want to point out, I didn't edit that, it just happens to you. Anyway, level 5 is a welcome respite from the Bone Zone. At first, structurally, it's much closer to the opening 3 levels, only you're no longer constrained by a time limit, which, again, might seem like a much needed breath of fresh air after how restrictive those opening levels could be, until you realise the game never gives you an alternative goal to work toward, which is not to suggest you don't have an objective. You do. It's up there on the screen right now. Guard the princess and scout the situation. I just don't know how you're meant to achieve it. Guard the princess, okay, I get that. I've been doing that all game, and I did it more here than all the other levels combined, because I was in level 5 for an hour and 50 minutes, and I suspect I got off lucky with that completion time. The Dragon Princess's Steam discussion forums are pretty well dead, but the most recent thread from 2024 was between a pair of poor souls trying to figure out what the fuck you're meant to do to get past Mission 5, since they'd been at it for hours, and had no idea what the game wanted from them. Even once one of them managed to get past it, they still had no idea how. They had theories about time commitments, level requirements, specific NPC interactions, but they were never able to properly nail down the actual triggers to complete the level. And I'd love to be able to say I have an answer to their questions, but I don't. I just lucked into the solution after 2 sessions of trial and error, and all I have to show for it is a few guesses on how to make it happen. So 233com, Rakasuru, my heart goes out to you. I don't fucking get it either. The mission doesn't start off in the pits of despair. It's nice to be in a new environment, flying over snowy fields instead of fantasy woods or the Bone Zone. It's refreshing to be free of a time requirement. It's certainly cathartic to find a nice big juicy castle to bully out of existence after playing Ghostbuster for an hour, and the human enemies that spawn in around it are much more fun to fight than the odd pack of spirits still haunting the environment. Even then, they only attack in groups of 5 or 6, and the big red liches that accompany them will usually drop some cool loot upon defeat. The only problem is that once you comb the map and find all this stuff, nothing actually happens. You can turn the place upside down and back to front, but the level will just keep going, and exploring around is only going to make the enemies spawn in faster. It doesn't matter if you hang around the cave with Alina, because eventually the castle garrison will start sending waves of soldiers and cavalry to abduct her anyway, even if you never fly over to piss them off. And you can't just camp the town either, because there's a monastery up on the hillside that will sneak troops right past you while you're not looking, if you're not careful. I completely missed the monastery on my first attempt, and only realised something was wrong when the game told me I had 10 seconds to save Alina or it was game over. So you still have 2 separate lines of attack that you need to keep an eye on, which gives you basically no time to explore the rest of the level once things pop off. I was able to keep most enemies pretty much trapped at their spawn points across the first 3 levels, but Mission 5 was less a question of if they would break through my defenses, and more a countdown to when. Alina's cave is actually pretty far from the town and the hillside monastery, and the 2 spawn points are pretty close by, so you'd think it would be easy to mount a defense, but that extra distance makes it easy to lose track of enemies moving through the woods or across the mountains. And they respawn at such a fast rate that reinforcements can have already deployed while you're still bogged down with the previous wave closer to the princess. It's genuinely like trying to hold back the tide, and once you lose the rhythm, it's basically over. You can build a literal wall of fire across the map that intersects with enemy pathfinding, and I did, and it still wasn't enough to hold them at bay. Eventually, they always got through to the princess, princess if the fucking liches didn't send me to the bone zone first. And you might as well burn the place to the ground because there's not actually much else to find around the map. Undead are hidden in a few out-of-the-way places, and there's this random tower over by this hill in the middle of everything. But otherwise, the place is just empty snowy fields and familiar patchwork forest. And after an hour of flying around, starting fires, and fuck all, I was on my hands and knees begging for a countdown timer like the early game had, because the Dragon's Princess was giving me nothing to work with. No matter how much time passed, no matter how many enemies I killed, no matter how many levels I reached, no matter what I did, the mission just kept going. I thought maybe if I took out the big buildings something might happen, but you can't actually bring these ones down. You can attack them, and they have health bars, but you'll never so much as scratch the stucco between the stones. These things were built to last. I thought maybe I'd missed some sort of item or pickup, so I scoured the map, slammed Elmar against every invisible wall I could find searching for an answer, but all I found was empty space. Like 233com and Rakasuru, I thought maybe if I survived long enough something might trigger, but time doesn't appear to factor into the solution at all. Sometimes the level continued for me at 30 minutes, sometimes it continued at 60, and the same was apparently true in their experience as well. I even thought maybe it was bugged, so I restarted from scratch multiple times, but nothing seemed to work. Eventually, the game just decided I'd had enough and moved on, but I have no fucking clue why. After killing like 10,000 enemies across 50 minutes, the game suddenly hit me with a cutscene.
Oh! These people seem to have found something interesting. We need to fly to them.
So I flew over to see what the fuck was going on, at which point this happened.
People! What are you talking about?
None of your business. Fly away, lizard.
Oh no. Is that a... You know what, it doesn't matter. This choice is not the only one in the game. You do get a second one right at the very end. I'm talking literal seconds before you see your final score. But it is the first, and it's so cruel. If you choose...
Oh, no one respects me. Okay. I'm leaving.
The game counts it as a fail state, and you get dumped into the bone zone, before the spooky squad boots you back to the main menu to do it all again. And like, why would you choose that option? It's obviously wrong compared to the other two, so I can't really claim that the game telegraphed the choice poorly. But no, you don't understand. The choice isn't the problem. The choice is fine. It's even funny. The problem is, it's on a fucking countdown. When I first hit this screen, I stopped to jot it all down in my notes, but after 30 seconds, the game just automatically chose the first option and kicked me back to the main menu. And yeah, taking longer than 3 seconds to make a decision here is probably not something the developers ever expected to happen. But why is it on a fucking countdown at all? This is where my first session with Mission 5 ended. I was so mad. I couldn't stomach another round of what the fuck am I meant to do here right after the game had slammed the door to freedom shut in my face. But things did not improve when I returned the next day. I lucked my way into the trigger again after several attempts and a few billion years, but then I made a critical error. I may not know what you have to do to trigger the dialogue at the tower, but I do know what you shouldn't do once it does. Do not make the same mistake I did. Do not, under any circumstances, save the game once you get the prompt to travel to the tower. In fact, drop what you're doing and go straight there, even if an army's closing in on the princess, because if you do anything else after getting the prompt, the dialogue choice will not trigger. I saved, went over to the tower, and was met with silence. Reloading did nothing. I had to quit to the main menu and start again from the level select screen, and only then, when I finally got the prompt again, was I able to finish Mission 5 at the tower. You may not be able to save it all in Mission 5. I don't know. I triggered the dialogue to go to the tower so rarely I couldn't reliably test it. All I know is that you can't ignore it. The notes can wait. First, I must kill.
Fly away, lizard.
Help! I want to live! Mommy!
And then the level just ends.
Elina, guess who's a good dragon?
Let me think. Ah, you maybe?
Yes, yes, yes! Ho, 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 ho! Look what a beautiful stone I've got! Excellent addition to my treasury!
Oh, wow. It shimmers. I think this is a rune, and it somehow needed to get crystallized.
Actually, I thought so too. You just got ahead of me with this idea.
Hey, I didn't mean to offend you. Better we continue.
Okay. The next point on the map is the desert. Let's go there.
God, he's such a fucking dumbass. Mission 5 isn't something you complete, it's something you endure. And only once the Dragon's Princess has decided you've suffered enough, will it permit you to continue. If most players pieced out after the first couple of levels, then I can only imagine Missions 4 and 5 cleaned up the few stubborn stragglers who persevered, until only the assholes like me were left. And as for Mission 6, it was over in like 5 minutes. Yep. It's probably the second easiest level in the game after the first. You've only got 10 minutes to complete it, but that is more than enough time to finish things off. You don't even need to worry about protecting Elina because she's already been kidnapped. You're just free to fly around and cause some chaos without fear of getting rumbled by the ghost gang or janky design. And it's great. It's also incredibly jarring. Mission 5 was the last of the game's free difficulty spikes. Elmarion the Dragon's Princess is never that challenging or that tedious again, to the point that levels 6 through 10 took me little over an hour to complete. Still, I will happily take short and jank over long and broken, especially with levels as janky as this. You quickly discover Elina's been captured by a nearby village of orcs.
It turns out these places are not so harmless. Many orcs live here.
Ah, my freaking ears? Did they just forget to put the voice line in?
Damn! What the hell? I'm gonna burn them.
And you do. And after destroying enough of the town, you just find Elina and then the level's over. Oh, I was kind of expecting more. Honestly, I spent most of my time in level 6 just flying around looking for the village, and that's only because I started searching to my right rather than my left after the opening dialogue finished. The orc village is actually just over the hill from the level's starting position. There's even an achievement to finish Mission 6 in less than 2 minutes, and if you bothered to skip the voice lines, I bet you could do it in less than 1. Not that I suggest you do, because these cutscenes are insane. This isn't even where you're meant to be going. Elmar and Elina just stop to rest along the way in these random mountains, and I just listen to it.
I like these mountains much more than previous. There's no flying nasty stuff here.
Yes, beautiful. Elmar, the last couple of days were exhausting. I know you too are tired. Would you maybe like to land somewhere for a little rest?
Yes, you are right. Dragon's powers are also not infinite. I need to eat, sleep. We're landing.
Then, without landing, or even fading to black, this happens.
Oh, I slept so well. Elina! Elina! Come on, get up! It's time to go! Elina! Hey! Where are you? Damn it! Where is she?
You lost
my
your
freaking
Elina.
ears! Anyway, Elmar and his inner voice have a bit of a heart-to-heart, though it's still not enough to make him admit that he actually cares about Elina. It's only once you've burned the village to the ground that he actually loosens up a little.
Oh, Elmar, you saved me. Again, what an irony. Not a knight, but the dragon saves me.
Yes, I have burned many creatures for you. Though, it's their own fault.
I'm I'm going to choose not to critically examine that statement. It's kind of frustrating for me as a reviewer just how quickly level 6 flies by too, because it doesn't give me much footage to work with in actually showing off just how much the orc buildings do not fit with the rest of the game's visual design. They're stylized in a way that brings to mind the exaggerated cartoony proportions of World of Warcraft, as opposed to the otherwise subdued look everything else in Elmarion has. They just don't really cohere into a consistent style. Like I said before, they look like they were made for a completely different game entirely. And if you think the Orc Village looks out of place, just wait until you see Mission 7. Level 6 doesn't just mark the end of the game's insane difficulty spikes, it's also the last time you get any sort of new variety in the objective design. Missions in The Dragon's Princess can be divided into 3 categories: defend Alina for a certain amount of time, find and destroy a specific group of enemies or buildings within a certain amount of time, and what the fuck am I meant to do? Thankfully that last one is the rarest of the 3. We've already gone through both examples featured in the game, but the other 2 actually kind of work. They're very unrefined in their current state, but that's something you could say about every aspect of Elmarion. Yet, if you gave them a little polish, I think they'd really shine. And this despite the fact so much of the game is one long escort mission. The real problem is a lack of engagement both within the level design and the mechanics of gameplay. I've spoken a lot about how most missions chain you to a specific location, but even if they didn't, there's not actually that much incentive to explore anyway. There are small permanent stat boosts to be found all over the environment, but they're not enough of an increase to make them worth searching out, especially with how hard they can be to pick up sometimes. Encountering the occasional mini-boss usually nets you better rewards, but outside of levels 4 and 5, they're usually placed around areas you'll have to visit regardless, and even then, it's easy to accidentally aggro them from a distance while trying to deal with something else. I ended up getting killed by an unexpected Lich Strike multiple times in level 5 while just trying to hold back the tide of the living. The loot they drop is way better than any of the individual stat upgrades too. Forget bunny ears or cheetah wings, what the fuck? Once a lich dropped the sarcophagus of real-life Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, and you can wear it as a breastplate, if you want. It gives you plus 15 to every stat, so why wouldn't you? Does that mean Egypt exists in this setting? Is this Earth? No, we're getting off topic. Wearables are also the only way to increase specific resistances without unlocking certain abilities, I'm pretty sure. What the resistances actually protect against, I don't really know. Armor is self-explanatory, but the 4 elemental resistances just leave me scratching my head, given the enemies exclusively use swords, bows, generic magic, and necromancy, unless loosed arrows count as an air attack and swords count as earth. No, I'm not going down that rabbit hole either. Whatever the case, it's good to keep the resistance scores high, especially early on when Elmar's a fragile little babby. A few arrows are more than enough to shoot him out of the sky at the start of the game, so there's no reason to hold off on leveling up or throwing on some bunny ears. You need all the help you can get. The game's 5 skills, or characteristics, are pretty basic too, but they definitely make more sense. Strength is attack damage, body is your health bar, intellect is your mana bar, speed reduces attack cooldowns, and luck determines how often you get rare loot drops. Each of the 4 dragon types come with different characteristics. For example, the fire dragon prioritizes strength and health over everything else, while the ice dragon dumps it all into intellect, and a green boy is just sort of generally shit. A little extra health, but otherwise that's it. He's got bad stats. I don't know why. You get a couple of characteristic points per level, so you don't have to stick to a specific build. By the end of my playthrough, Elmar was basically a flying machine gun buried under a suit of stolen sarcophaguses. There was nothing any enemy could do to actually hurt him, or even get close enough to try, and I suspect if anyone does make it that far into the game, every build more or less coalesces into Dragon of Mass Destruction, regardless of each class's abilities. The game does try to impose a difficulty curve on Elmar's power power by slapping a level cap on every mission, which I think is a little bit crap, but given how quickly you descend through the ranks otherwise, I can't really fault its inclusion. Buildings already bring in big experience, but dropping a ball of magma on a column of enemies like you're bowling a strike is just as good once you invest a couple of points into the ability. By the late game, all I had to do was drop down a few firewalls and the levels all but unlocked themselves, which was certainly satisfying after the hell grind of the game's first half, but also felt a little forced. Exponentially increasing the experience cost of each level is a much more organic way to balance player power throughout an RPG in my opinion, and the wild thing is, Elmarion knows this. It's already in the game, but the mechanic is hobbled by the fact most missions have endlessly respawning enemies. Even with the time limits on 7 of the game's 10 missions, I still hit the level cap on 8 of them, because there were just so many guys to kill, which loops back into what I was saying about exploration. Enemies will still make raids on Alina if they can, whether or not you've discovered their spawn points, but finding the towns and villages and castles where they pop in will set them off like you've taken a swing at a hornet's nest. Attacking them at home can be satisfying, and it certainly stops them from making a run at the princess in the short term, but it leaves you just as distracted from defending against any other raids that might be sneaking in from somewhere else on the map. It's just better to camp Alina's position and defend her as the raids come in, especially when you've got no other objective to deal with, especially once the enemy clown castles wind up into full production. It's only really safe to leave the nest early on in any given level, and only to search out the big buildings and mini-bosses so you can smash them and grab their loot. But once you make it past level 5, even that becomes unnecessary. By that point you'll be so powerful and the objective so simple that the only thing even possibly capable of posing a challenge is your own impatience. The enemies certainly won't. Their only advantage is their small size, which they lose the second they form up a convenient line for you to mow down. Most of the time, their one brain cell will command them to seek out Alina, unless Elmar's close enough to the ground to trigger an attack, at which point they'll turn their focus on the dragon. Past the game's midpoint, their sheer numbers become their only real weapon, which could be interesting, but the enemies never think tactically or strategically, at least not intentionally. It can be hard to deal with single enemies climbing over awkward terrain or slaloming between the trees, especially if you're low on mana or close to the princess, because, as I said, ranged attacks just break in both scenarios, and melee is unreliable at the best of times. But there's no intent behind their pathfinding. The game decides a route for them to take, and they take it, with no regard for self-preservation. They won't dodge around your attacks or divert around player-made obstacles like walls of fire. They'll just keep on marching until you kill them. Even swooping down to draw their attention won't drag them that far off their predetermined path. Flying enemies and ranged enemies are a little different, since they'll only go after Elmar, but they're still just as weak as the humans on the ground, even if they can carve through your health in seconds once enough of them join the swarm, and they still don't do anything to avoid your attacks. The only reason they're slightly more engaging to fight is that you have to take positioning into account, but it's still just trading attacks until a health bar hits 0. Flying enemies specifically present way more of a challenge because most of your attacks just don't seem to affect them early on, the same way they don't seem to affect buildings, which does limit your options, but not by much most of the time. It was only in level 4, with its 10 billion ghosts, that the issue really became insufferable. And make no mistake, it was fucking insufferable, but otherwise I was able to skate by with what I had. My point is, the enemies are too basic to pose much of a tactical challenge, but too numerous to safely ignore them for most of the game, and that's regardless of whether they're hanging in the sky waiting for you to get too close, or trekking across the map with orders to abduct Alina. I don't think it's a bad starting point, but it really needed more depth to remain interesting across the entire game. game. Even when I was struggling to hold back the tide in level 5, I was more frustrated by the lack of instruction than engaged by the combat. The thing is, I can think of ways to add that depth without actually having to change much. Destroying buildings in a raid could put a cooldown on the next round of enemy spawns, which would not only incentivize exploration, but give you some wriggle room to deal with other nearby towns already in the process of marching on Alina. Having different factions on a map could create conflict between enemies, and giving the player some way to influence their fighting would add a ton of complexity to the gameplay. You can already lure undead over to the town in level 5, and both humans and orcs exist in level 3, they just don't interact. The game already features dialogue options too, such as they are, and the possibilities of integrating that into gameplay more generally are only limited by your imagination. Even something as simple as being able to set fire to forests or buildings to force enemies to take a detour around the conflagration would add a little to the experience. Elmarion's one saving grace when it comes to gameplay is Elmar himself. I've said it before, I'll say it again. He's just fun to control. The flying mechanics are intuitive, simple, and responsive, though they weren't at release. It took a couple of patches to really nail down the movement from what I've read in updates and old reviews, but Fleon did eventually nail it down, and the end result is great fun. For all the game's faults, it is actually what I wanted out of Elmarion's promise of being a dragon simulator. The combat abilities are more of a mixed bag. You do get a lot of variety, especially when you consider how each dragon type comes with its own roster of 10 attacks, but very few of them were actually worth using in my opinion. I'm mostly speaking about the fire dragon here since I only jumped into the first couple of levels to give the other 3 types a try, but by the end of the game I was only using 4 out of the 10 options. I'd specialised to such a degree I hadn't put a single point into any of the other 6 by the time I reached the ending. In fact, I never used them at all. Fire Strike is the fire dragon's starting attack, a single-use fireball that can only hit one target, but what it lacks in splash damage, it makes up for in speed. It was already taking out enemies in 1 or 2 hits from the get-go, but upgraded it was basically an instant kill orbital laser. Its only downside was its tendency to vaporize over long distances, but outside of levels 4, 7, and 10, it was never really an issue. Flame Ball is the second ability on the roster, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. It struggles to hurt aerial enemies and buildings, but if you can cough one out into a group of soldiers on the ground, it can take the lot of them out in a single bound. It does require some finessing. If you really want it to travel, you have to hit the button while in motion yourself. From a hovering position, it just sort of flops to the ground, and even then, there's no real way to aim it. You just have to point it in the right direction and hope Elmar will vomit it up where you want it to go. But it's still tremendous fun, especially since it doesn't immediately disappear. It'll just sit in place and radiate damage, so if you drop it on an enemy spawn point, they'll just keep running right into it for as long as it hangs around. Fire Strikes was the third ability I unlocked, and it's more or less the starting fire ability, but a little bit weaker and with some added range. It can hit multiple targets at once, and it can be extremely useful when you're struggling to hold back an encroaching wave of enemies and you're low on mana, but it was more of a backup power than a mainstay. I only really used it when I had to, not because I wanted to. And the final ability I used was Firewall, because there was pretty much nothing landbound enemies could do to counter it. Each wall might be pretty narrow and not do much damage, but line them up along a known enemy pathway and they're literally cooked. Upgrade it a few times and it's basically broken. All of the attacks are. Past level 10, every click of the mouse button can unleash hundreds of points of damage. You're more or less unstoppable at that point, at the very top of the power curve, as any good dragon should be. But the rest of the the abilities just didn't strike me as useful. There were a couple of really expensive offensive attacks in there, like actual fire breath, the thing Western dragons are probably best known for, but most were defensive options, shields to harden Elmar's scales, or intimidating roars to slow enemy movements. And thinking back on the game, I can't recall any moment in any mission where those things might have helped. There were occasions where I ended up getting overwhelmed by enemy numbers, but most of those were in Mission 5, and given how scuffed that whole scenario is, I don't think having any defensive options would have made things any better. And the same is true for the Ice Dragon and the Electric Dragon as well. Their abilities are more or less variations on a theme. The Ice Dragon swaps out hot for cold, and can not only slow enemies down, but freeze them in blocks of ice, and the Electric Dragon gets to spawn balls of static electricity in to shock enemies that get too close, summon storms at varying degrees of severity, and swoosh right into the astral plane to avoid taking damage. I can see how they might shake things up if you really played to their strengths once you got past the early game hell, but I can also see how they're just harder versions of the Fire Dragon campaign. The only dragon that I think is really worth a second playthrough to try out is unfortunately the Fugly Green Bastard, whose abilities are built around summoning helpers to fight for you rather than dealing out the damage yourself. You still have a couple of attacks to fall back on, like how you can summon an explosion of rock from underground that will leech health from nearby enemies, but you'll mainly be summoning Ents and Ent Mages and flying golems, and then buffing them with all your other abilities. You even get a variation on the classic Dragon's Fire Breath that not only hurts your enemies, but heals your friends. Given how weak the Green Dragon is stat-wise, it feels like something that would take a lot of time and effort to master, but could also be incredibly rewarding if you did. It's crazy how many enemies the Dragon's Princess throws at you. According to the game itself, by the final boss, I'd killed over 12,000 guys, and I suspect that's only counted from successful attempts. So the thought of being able to throw a wall of trees up against that to dam the flow of steel and dead men is oh so tempting. Indeed, I was so tempted I even played a bit longer with the green guy to try them out, though trapped in the early game hell, the summons leave a lot to be desired. Still, it's there if you want. Regardless of what starter dragon you choose, every attack consumes mana. It does replenish over time, but it's faster to camp around a standing stone to let it refill the bar instantly. These things are dotted all over every map, and are usually pretty close to Alina whenever you're asked to defend her position, so you might as well say every attack is free for the vast majority of the game. You can also acquire crystals that can top up the bar with a touch of a button, but mana was so plentiful to begin with that I didn't even realise I could until the last couple of levels, by which point I had somehow collected over 300. I'm not exactly sure how. I know you get them as rewards for kill streaks, but that still seems like more than I'd expect. They are useful though, especially if you decide to spec into the abilities that turn your mana bar into armor, and somehow manage to trivialize the combat even more than the standing stones already do. Taken as a whole, Elmarion's gameplay is extremely jank, clearly, but it works, and it does provide the Dragon Simulator experience I was hoping for in its own scuffed way. Even the tiny size of the enemies is accounted for with a minimap. The only issue I really have left to bring up is how you equip your abilities. You have to drag them from the character screen to the ability wheel in the bottom right corner, but the game never tells you this, and it can be hard to know if it's worked until you start scrolling to select a new attack. It's even worse when swapping between dragon types because the previous class's abilities will remain visually on the wheel, even if in practice they're no longer equipped. But if that's the absolute worst thing I have to say about the combat, I think it got off pretty light compared to the level design. Speaking of which, pyramids. I hope Tutankhamun doesn't want his sarcophagus back.
At last, we've arrived. It's quite deserted here.
Well, this is a desert. Therefore, it's deserted.
Where are the people?
I read that once some dragon burned down the city here. That's why there are no people here. Was that you by any chance?
Oh, I lost my temper back then. They had only themselves to blame.
You know, I'm starting to think that maybe Elmar's the problem. Anyway, Mission 7 is set over a vast stretch of rolling desert dunes, broken up by the occasional oasis town. Your goal is to bring down the free pyramids. In fact, they're the only buildings in the map you can destroy, and unlike most other man-made structures in the game, they're actually vulnerable to your magical attacks, though it's still a lot easier to claw them to death given how much damage each melee strike does. It's a simple objective with a simple solution, and if they were defended by humans or orcs, the whole level would be over in about 5 minutes. But the game has yet another enemy faction to throw at you, a swarm of what I first thought were pixies, but after getting a better look at the model via a couple of mini-bosses, I'm now pretty sure are flying succubi. These are the definitely topless, possibly naked monster girl enemies I spoke about in the chapter on presentation. Not that you can really tell either way because they're so small. It's only the much larger mini-bosses that have enough skin to even catch the eye, and while it might have turned some heads in the early 2000s, these days it just comes off as quaint, to the point I doubt even YouTube's most puritanical of back-end robots will flag it as a violation of common decency. Stylistically, they're another aspect of the Dragon's Princess that feels lifted from a different, unfinished project, but as enemies, they are shockingly functional. They appear in far fewer numbers than the Bone Brigade from level 4, so there's less chance of being overwhelmed, and all your attacks can actually damage them. They're not your only threat though, because the level is also populated with giant king cobras that will take pot shots at you from the sand. As a desert level enemy, it's a bit obvious, but it works, and the fact this is their only appearance in the game makes them stand out as unique. It's the same with the succubi, who vanish the second the level ends. They might not add much variety, but when combined with the desert setting and old pyramids, it does convey the sense that you've travelled a great distance since the last couple of missions, and you're gone just as quickly back the way you've come, because once you deal with the swarm of succubi defending each oasis, the pyramids go down in as little as one attack.
So much trouble, but no result.
Yes, Elmar. It looks like there's nothing interesting here.
Maybe we're just late.
I think so too. What are we going to do? Should we go further?
Where? There is a large cross marking the territory of people.
Oh, indeed. It's my father's land. Well, let's fly there.
Well, I'm glad we came all this way for fucking nothing. Anyway, who wants another timed escort mission?
We're here, but it's unclear what to do.
We should wait. Let's watch. Do you think my father's people know we're here?
I don't know.
I think it's a safe bet. Level 8 is the culmination of the early game's objective design that tasks you to defend the princess from 3 different directions for 20 whole entire minutes. It sounds like it should be awful, but for once, things are actually stacked in your favour. Alina is resting at a cave in the middle of a crater that only has 3 points of entry, and each one has a long winding road that makes it easy to set up a line of firewalls to keep your enemies at bay. The only thing that tripped me up was that at first I thought there were only 2 points of entry. The third group of enemies took so long to arrive, I didn't even realise they were coming at all until they were already inside the crater making a grab for Alina. But once the leak was plugged up, there was basically nothing any of them could do to stop me. Their numbers meant nothing against my firestorm. Keeping the firewalls up and running was the only reason I even had to move after a while. There are some towns to raid outside the crater, and they do look visually distinct from everything that's come before with their white walls and red roofs, but as always, raiding them is only worth it early on for a few extra levels. Level 8 is so straightforward that I don't actually have that much to say about it. The 20-minute countdown does drag, but oddly not as much as the 15-minute countdown from level 3. It's the game at its best, the closest the Dragon's Princess ever comes to the experience I think the the developers were actually aiming for, and after the endless madness of levels 4 and 5, and the shocking brevity of levels 6 and 7, it did serve as a nice palate cleanser in terms of pacing. It's part of the reason I can't bring myself to hate Elmarion, despite how awful some parts of it can be. When it works really well, jank and all. Unfortunately, it doesn't last.
Elina, your father's people, every time, know exactly where you are. How is that possible?
I don't know. This is really strange. We need to think about it.
And we still haven't learned anything about the artifact. What are we gonna do?
Yes, we need to do something or you will burn down all the people of my country.
Elina decides the only thing to do is to return home to the king and hope that stops the endless flow of her own countrymen marching right into Elmar's open jaws, and he actually goes along with it.
This is a very selfless step on your part. You're worried about people coming to kill you. I think you deserve a crown more than your father.
He's not even all that tsundere about it, he just respects her wishes and lets her go, which I guess is indicative of some character development on his part, but it's also really stupid. The heroes having a falling out at the end of the second act is a pretty tired trope at this point, but I wouldn't even call this situation an example of that, since Elmar and Elina don't actually fight over anything, and while the reasons make sense, they don't hold up if you give them a second thought. Elmar has killed thousands of people by this point in the game, most of them just to protect Elina, and she only went searching for him to begin with because she knows her father has plans to kill all the dragons in the land. Going back home isn't going to stop the attacks on Elmar, and princess or not, she's got a lot of people killed, plus she got in the way of her father's quest to become more powerful. If there was any point in the story where Elmar should have dropped the tsundere act and leaned into the trope of a princess abducting dragon, it's here, because splitting up is such a bad idea, even he should be able to see it, which actually would create some conflict between them that the story could then escalate into a proper falling out, and that'd flow much better into level 9 as it already exists, because, sure enough...
What a non-entity is this king? He wants to execute his own daughter? I must save her, and I'll burn her daddy. I'm sick of him.
Or maybe
Ah, my frickin' ears.
it's just a play, a trap, so that you came to save her, and that's all they need?
Ha 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 ha! What can they do to me, these little people? Ambush several archers? I'll burn them faster than they pull the string.
You shouldn't be so self-confident, Elmar. People are cunning.
Even if it is a trap, then what? Should I just sit and watch her being executed?
Well, you cannot be dissuaded. Be careful, people have a lot of crossbow weapons.
Elmarion's penultimate mission tasks you with saving Elina from the gallows, and honestly, it's a lot of fun. She's located in the middle of a big fantasy city on top of a hill, filled with castles to tear down, and hundreds of enemy soldiers to roast alive inside their armor. I'd hesitate to call the moment cinematic, it's still just a little bit too jank for that, but there's certainly a sense of climax as you crest the hill and bring Elmar's fury down on the city in Elina's defense. Even the king's mages are helpless against the dragon's might. It's such a fantastic inversion of the usual context of a dragon attack, but it still nonetheless provides all the chaos and carnage you'd expect from such a battle. There is nothing anyone here can do to stop Elmar from getting to Elina, and the catharsis of that after the mid-game hell is fucking orgasmic. I only wish it was longer. It's not like you have to bring down the castle to rescue Elina. She's already at the gallows out in the Bailey, and I'm pretty sure all you have to do to complete the level is swipe the stupid thing into splinters. It's over way too quickly for what is in essence the game's climax, but damn is it fun while it lasts.
Oh, Elmar. I knew you would not let them execute me. Thank you.
Your father is crazy. How can he execute his own daughter?
He has gone mad because of this artifact. And he's ready to do just about anything. You know, he smiled slyly when he ordered to prepare the gallows. Are you okay? Were you wounded badly?
I'm totally fine. They tried to make an ambush and kill me, but they clearly underestimated me.
Unfortunately, Elmar's inner monologue was right to be suspicious of a trap. The king sent Alina to be executed and sacrificed his own city just to distract Elmar while he stole the rune they got back at the end of level 5, and the plan went off without a hitch. A lot of his own men died, his own city ended up reduced to a pile of rubble, but that was a sacrifice he was willing to make, and that's honestly kind of clever. We haven't even met this guy, and he's already running rings around Elmar.
Oh, I am not a dragon, but an idiot!
The plot then jumps ahead several weeks by the time the game loads in its 10th and final mission. But before we reach the end of this janky adventure, I want to take a closer look at the story. Elmarion's narrative might be as threadbare as every other aspect of the game, but it still gets just enough right to make it oddly compelling. Dragons abducting princesses for one reason or another is an old trope, and subversions to it aren't exactly new either. Damsel is a recent popular example of a classic dragon story turned on its head, even if the final product wasn't actually that good, don't at me, but it's hardly the first. I can think of at least a few webcomics from the 2010s exploring similar ideas of a captive princess and her dragon guardian working together, and even the twist of making the monster feminine has been around for decades given the existence of Shrek and Dragon Slayer. It's such a staple trope of heroic fantasy that it pops up everywhere, even in Tolkien if you plumb the horrific depths of the Silmarillion. Works that play the whole thing straight often still put an interesting spin on it too. For example, in Deltora Quest, dragons covet women for their hair, so it became a cultural custom in one part of the world for women to shave their heads to avoid attracting their attention, even many years after the last of them disappeared. And yet, for how well trod ground the idea is by this point, the dragon's princess actually managed to find a new angle of attack by making Elmar a massive idiot. I've come across sinister dragons with supernatural cunning. I've come across animalistic monsters that are little more than living, breathing natural disasters. And I've occasionally even read about the odd sympathetic dragon. Rarely I've found all three in the same setting, but I've never come across a dumbass with wings. Elmar is otherwise the classic dragon in every way. He's arrogant, he's selfish, he doesn't really care about the lives of other creatures, and he's certainly not going to let anything so silly as morals get in his way, but he's also just such a fucking himbo, and that's what makes him endearing, if you don't take the game seriously, which I don't think you're meant to anyway, not the story at least. The whole time I was playing, I just kept thinking of him as a big clumsy dog who only wants to help, but just keeps making things worse. Or maybe a better comparison would be Homer Simpson from the early years of the cartoon, when he was characterized as a caring oaf rather than an abusive piece of shit. Even the voice reminded me a little of Homer. They've both got independent inner monologues too.
Oh, you can stay, but I'm leaving.
Yellow if they're using late season apples. And of course in Canada the whole thing's flip-flop.
Oh, my freaking ears!
Elmar does care, he's just not very good at expressing it, even to himself. So much of the game is spent with him pretending he doesn't really care about Alina, that he's only on the adventure with her to protect himself from the king's plans. But when the quest leads nowhere, and they decide to part ways, they do so amiably. The fact he does care is what makes his shift into outright hero in the last couple of levels work so well, even if the way he and Alina split split up at the end of level 8 is still really unsatisfying. And while he does end up killing a lot of people, like a lot of people, it's almost always in self-defense. You really have to go out of your way to be an evil bastard in this game, which stops Elmar from falling too far out of the player's sympathies. He has surprising chemistry with Alina too. I like their dynamic of him being the muscle and her being the brains. There is a bit of a disconnect between Alina's active participation in the plot and her passivity in general gameplay, especially with how often she ends up kidnapped, even with Elmar's protection. But there is also something refreshing in her finding strength in her wits and compassion instead of a sword like a lot of subverted damsels do. Their dialogue might still be absolutely bonkers, but their friendship works, and aside from the end of level 8, it's convincing, but I think I've criticised that moment enough. If I have any other complaints about the story, it's how vague the stakes are most of the time. The king is after the Crystallis, which he wants to use to destroy the last of the dragons, and the Rune of Siniel, which will apparently grant him great power, and that has both Alina and Elmar concerned, but given what those things are, and what they do, is never explained to the player, I'm just left scratching my head as to why I should care. I love a good fantasy quest, but I also like to know why I'm on it too. It was never really what kept me coming back to the game anyway, especially since it takes so fucking long to get going. I didn't even know there was a quest to go on until I sat down to make this video, but it's still odd just how much of an afterthought it is. The mid-game is spent flying from one side of the world to the other, but after finding the rune in level 5, by level 8, the adventure just sort of trails off and disappears. I get the implication is that the king beat them to the pyramids and found Crystallis first, but that's never explained in the game itself, and by the time you actually confront the guy in level 10, he's given up on using it to kill all the dragons, which, Elmar aside, are completely absent from the game anyway. No wonder he's moved on to bigger things. And again, the threat of whatever Crystallis does could have been used to build a more convincing conflict around which to frame Elmar and Alina's falling out at the end of level 8. Maybe Alina sends Elmar away to protect him or something, and at first he does leave, but then his own empathy gets the better of him and he comes back to save her. It would have given level 7 and 8 a bit more narrative weight than the shrug of, well, we tried, they currently have. It's not just the overall stakes that are vaguely defined. The whole setting of the game is too, but in a way that I find much more compelling. The lack of any exposition on the game's part turns the setting into a bit of a mystery to uncover through dialogue and map design and enemy encounters. At the start of The Dragon's Princess, the only definite fantasy aspect of the world is Elmar himself, but by the time you reach the final level, the place has unfolded into a setting full of magic and supernatural creatures. I don't think it's as deep or open to interpretation as something like the works of From Software, or as clearly defined as the games from BioWare's heyday, but it still coheres into a living, breathing world, even if in terms of visual design, nothing really fits together. There are layers of history here, thin though they are, stretching back thousands of years with the occasional nod to an invasion of undead, or lost civilizations, or powerful magical artifacts. There might be nothing more to the world than those references, but it feels like there could be. The game convincingly conveys that, despite how little it actually reveals about its setting. It reminds me a little bit of films like Zardoz. Neither work actually says that much about what's going on to its audience, and both are absolutely insane from start to finish. But the pieces all clearly fit together for somebody, even if they have to be high as a dragon and breathing just as much smoke. The Dragon's Princess left me wanting to know more about this world, and given how few answers it actually provides, there's plenty of room for expansion. It might have originated as several different fantasy game projects getting slammed together, but the end result is a world that's familiar but mysterious, and I'd be happy to spend more time in it. Just the fact there are no other dragons hanging around besides Elmar raises questions. Did they all die in the zombie war? Was he left alive because he's too dumb to pose a threat to the people nearby? Without a big lore codex, there's no way to tell, but I honestly honestly appreciate the room to interpret things how I want more than if the game actually threw the player some answers. It certainly worked to great effect with the villain. Elena's father might be no more than a generic evil king in execution, but we learn so little about him that his plans come off as way more cunning than they probably are. Having him off-screen until the very end builds intrigue about his character, and actually allows him to be sinister, since the dialogue is never given a chance to make him goofy or over the top until the very end. It's like the difference between Sauron and Morgoth in Tolkien's writing. Morgoth might be more evil, but the second he showed up in person to gloat about his victory over the heroic alliance of men and elves in Children of Húrin, he lost all his menace. He's just characterized as such a cartoonish villain, whereas Sauron remains a credible threat throughout Lord of the Rings because you learn literally nothing about him other than his goals. Elena's father might be no worse than your average Disney villain, but his absence does build him up as a threat, especially in level 9, given his plan to trick Elmar into leaving the Rune of Siniel unguarded by threatening his own daughter with execution plays out exactly as intended. The fact he's willing to let his own city burn to get what he wants says so much about his character too, and actually does raise the stakes before the final level. It doesn't last, of course, but the fact this janky little dragon game was able to move me with its story at all is worth praising. It might not be a hidden gem of video game storytelling, or integrate its narrative much into its mechanics, but it's more than I was expecting. Plus, it's just fun. Without it, I probably never would have been compelled to come back to it after the first couple of levels.
You know, Elena, we've been living this way for several weeks, and nothing happens. Do you think your father managed to find Crystalis?
I don't know. At least he's not interested in you and me anymore. And his people stopped coming here.
Look, it seems like you're wrong. Someone is coming here, but he is unarmed and alone.
Let's talk to him then, but don't burn him.
Your Highness! Princess! Signor Dragon!
Signor Dragon? Wait, why is he Australian?
Don't kill me!
We are listening to you, but don't try to play games with us.
Your Highness! Your father has gone crazy! He turned into a monster! Ever since he took possession of this terrible staff, it was as if he had lost his head. He killed all the other kings and took over their kingdoms. He declared himself a god and began to destroy entire villages and cities if they did something wrong. A girl from our village refused to become his mistress, and he burned our village. 1,000 people are executed every day in the capital.
And the dragons?
Yeah, we've done that too. Elena's right. What about the dragons?
Dragons don't bother him now. He is sure that if he sees a dragon, he will burn it in an instant.
And you want me to fly there so that he checked it on me? I don't really want to.
Your Highness, Princess Elena, please, it's your people. He'll just kill everyone. He is no longer human.
Are you suggesting that I should kill my father?
Elena, did you miss the part where the guy was executing thousands of people every day? I know by this point spending time with Elmar has probably desensitized you to that sort of thing, but come on.
Every day, thousands of people die because of him.
Have you tried to do anything yourself?
Yes. Many have tried to revolt. He just burned everyone.
Okay, I understand. The world must be saved again.
Okay, so a lot of plot just happened very quickly. Elena's dad has gone from a random dude with a cunning plan to a supervillain off-screen in the space of 2 weeks. And we're just never going to see any of that. But even after all he's done, she still asks Elmar to spare his life, if he can.
I can't believe what my father has become. Elmar, I will not ask you to take such a risk for me. And I won't ask you to spare my father. But if there's some way to stop him without killing him, remember me.
I do like that she's not firm about it. She gets that sometimes people are too far gone to be saved, but she still offers her compassion. Not that you have to take her up on it. You can just kill her father, whose name is apparently Grun. King Grun. Alright, anyway, you can just kill him if you want. In fact, you have to defeat him in battle anyway to even get the choice. And the fight is exactly as jank as you'd expect. It's more than possible to shoot him out of the sky before you even get close enough to draw his aggro. And like all the flying enemies, he won't even respond if you do. Demigod my fucking ass. Of course, the Dragon's Princess being the game that it is, depleting Grun's health bar didn't actually kill him. So I just went exploring around the level for a bit. I got in close to have a better look at him, and he does have a sort of interesting design, sort of like a hulked out druid, but from a distance he's just brown and boring, and he certainly doesn't look like he should be able to fly. He's another character that feels ripped right out of a different game, and... wait... did Elmar's mouth always look like that? Anyway, there's not much to the map. It's just another big crater with a fun little cave at one end that you can enter, but unfortunately goes nowhere. Weirdly, it was only once I took a look through the cave that Elmarion actually allowed me to land the killing blow by coughing up a ball of lava in Grun's face, and once I did, I was treated to what might be the most dissonant voice acting in The Dragon's Princess, possibly in any game.
Groan! You lost, and you will answer for your crimes.
Don't kill me! I have a lot of gold. I know dragons love gold.
I was not expecting him to sound like that, holy shit. Anyway, Grun tries to tempt Elmar with gold, but he's having none of it.
All gold in this world will be yours if you want.
Don't you understand what you've done? How many innocent people have you killed?
Ha 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 ha! Look at yourself, dragon! Haven't you counted how many people you've burned?
Yes, I burned your people. But the difference is, I didn't want it. They went to kill me or Alina, and received an answer.
I mean, he's right, technically, but Elmar didn't have to be so happy about it every time an enemy soldier wandered into his line of sight either. It's not like he needed to be shaking his head out of remorse or disgust the whole time to let us know he wasn't cool with it or anything, but trying to take the high ground against the villain by claiming you didn't do as much genocide, and even if you did do a little bit of genocide, you didn't want to, is fucking wild. The game even tells you how many thousands of people you killed right after this conversation. It's so tone deaf, and yet it's definitely in character. This is absolutely something Elmar would say. It's fucking perfect. Anyway, after all that, you can still choose to spare him for Alina's sake if you want.
Enough talking. Now you'll pay for everything.
Will you kill me?
No, I'll leave you your life to you. Let Queen Alina decide your fate.
Alright, bye. And if you choose to kill him, all that changes is Elmar's parting line of dialogue.
I'll burn you. You deserved it.
Grun still just floats slowly to the ground, obscured by the score screen. Fucking beautiful. The game doesn't even end. It just sort of trails off. The score box remains fixed to the middle of the screen, and there's no way to get rid of it or progress to credits, but you can still fly around as much as you like. But yeah, that's it. There's no denouement with Alina or ending text crawl about her and Elmar restoring the kingdom after Grun's defeat. The game just stops. I almost wonder if the devs expected people to ever make it this far, because it certainly doesn't feel like it. At this point, the only way out is to hit escape and manually return to the main menu yourself. It crashed. I hope by now I've been able to convey what makes this game special, as much as I've joked about what it gets wrong. I said at the start of this video that one of the biggest hurdles to clear when it comes to having an adult dragon as a protagonist, and especially a player character in a video game, is how powerful they usually are. And, much as escort missions are their own special kind of awful, framing Elmarion's gameplay around keeping Alina safe does bypass that issue without coming off as as contrived, at least from a story perspective. The same is true of Elmar's issues dealing with more powerful supernatural entities, like the hordes of undead in Mission 4, even if the level is absolutely awful to play in practice. Combined with the aerial movement controls, and like I said, it's basically halfway there. And if a janky indie game can come so close to pulling the concept off, then maybe a pure dragon simulator isn't as impossible a game to make as I thought. Elmarion the Dragon's Princess is one of the rare games that left me guessing from start to finish, and not just in terms of its plot. It's wild how much it gets right about dragon simulator gameplay, while simultaneously getting so much wrong about level and encounter design. There is talent and potential here that I can't help but admire, while at the same time I never want to play through certain parts of the Dragon's Princess again. The jank is at once its best and worst quality, and I want to recommend it to anyone looking for a pure dragon simulator experience just as much as I want to tell you not to touch it, because it came so close to being exactly what I wanted, while also not being what I wanted at all. I don't really know how I feel about this game, but I do know I want more. What the game currently offers is a perfectly good baseline of systems and mechanics upon which to build and expand, and even stripped down to those basic elements and smothered in jank, I had fun. I can see what the devs were aiming for, and how you could make it better. Elmarion the Dragon's Princess is not a particularly good game, but it satisfied a craving I've had for decades, and did so with surprising competence, at least some of the time. The sheer amount of jank holds it back from ascending into true cult status, but it's definitely entertaining. Elmar the tsundere bunny girl himbo has joined the hallowed ranks of Smaug and Vermithrax Pejorative as one of the best dragons in fiction for me, and Alina is no slouch either as his titular princess. It's a very strange take on a very old tale, and as much as some parts of it absolutely sucked, I can't help but look back on it fondly. From the mechanics to the setting, I want more, though perhaps not from Fleon Games. As I mentioned way back at the start of this video, Elmarion the Dragon's Princess is actually the second dragon-based game they released in 2020, the other being Elmarion Dragon Time. It looks very similar in terms of gameplay and interface, at least from the trailers. You still have the option of 4 different classes, but just looking at the screenshots on the Steam store page reveals some huge differences. Like, we never saw half of this shit in the Dragon's Princess, and we certainly never got to land on the ground. It's been in early access for 5 years now, and unfortunately doesn't appear to have been updated in free, so I think it's safe to assume that it's been abandoned. And tempted as I am to give it a try, I think I have to give it a pass. I do wonder though if so many of the questions I have about Elmarion's setting are answered in Dragon Time, given defending outposts from hordes of undead is one of the missions spoken about in the store page, and that would line up with the zombie war Elmar mentions once or twice here, but well. I guess we'll never know. Fleon also released another game in what I assume from the title is the same setting, called Elmarion the Lost Temple, that actually did exit early access at the end of 2024. Unfortunately, one look at the trailer reveals blatant and undisclosed use of generative AI, which I don't really want to support. The Dragon's Princess I think released just early enough to avoid any hidden AI-generated nastiness, but I'm not touching the Lost Temple with a 10-foot pole after that trailer. Plus, it appears to be a generic dungeon crawler rather than a dragon simulator, and if my tsundere himbo isn't the star, then what's even the point of playing? I've yet to find the dragon simulator I've been dreaming of for years. Just fucking toss it on the pile of games I'll apparently have to make myself. But Elmarion the Dragon's Princess proved the idea is possible, if in its own extremely janky way, and it gives me hope that I might one day get to play the game I've had in my head for over 2 decades now. Fleon and I can't be the only ones to want a proper dragon simulator. The Steam reviews for it, and Dragon Time, are full of people expressing how the idea of playing as the monster appeals, so the demand is there. I hope someday someone meets it, but until that day comes, we'll always have Elmarion the Dragon's Princess to scratch that dragon simulator itch, for better or for worse. Thanks for watching. And that's the video. Before I go, I'd like to thank by name the people supporting me with $5 US a month or more on Patreon. Open parentheses, Borat Hacking Voice, close parentheses, I am in, my wife, Azazel, Cass, Hawkwing2652, Hey Matey, Jeffiet, Marcy May, Operator Error, Paranoid Android, Sminglis, Sarah Bloomer, Smorsky, Sneezy McGlassface, Space Quest Historian, This Sauerkraut, Ursa, and Zeke the Phantom. Thank you so much. That was a lot, so in the next video we're going to take it easy and do some gardening. Look out for that soon. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. That truly is the most horrendous thing I've ever drawn. Jesus wept.